continuing with the theme of compassion and pity, and the subsection about cruelty, and it says here the Torah describes a city whose inhabitants conspire to join together in idolatry, and after careful investigation, meeting specific criteria, the city is declared a city of corruption, and that's from Ir Nidachas, and is condemned to utter destruction. The Torah commands that all the inhabitants of the city should be executed, and the city and its contents burned and razed to the ground. And it says in Devarim, no part of the banned property may adhere to your hand, so that Hashem will turn back from his burning wrath, and he will give you mercy and be merciful to you and multiply you as he swore to your forefathers. So it says here also, continuing, the Torah commands to kill the inhabitants and destroy the entire city, including the animals. This action will engender the quality of cruelty in the hearts of these men. As the Ishmaelites, who are a group of royal executioners described, they are consumed with a tremendous desire to kill when they execute people, since compassion has been uprooted from their hearts and they have become absolutely cruel. The same character transformation could become rooted in the killers of a city of corruption. For this reason, Hashem promised that he would give them mercy in spite of the natural development of cruelty. Hashem, the source of compassion, will bestow upon power of compassion anew to eliminate the power of cruelty which resulted from their actions. Okay, then there's something more practical. Behavior which is naturally cruel, even if done in accord with the divine commandment, is likely to transform a compassionate person into a cruel one. Therefore, Hashem promises that he will bestow upon them the supernatural power of renewed compassion in order to eliminate the attribute of cruelty that was implanted by their actions. Conversely, a person who may be indifferent or callous to others can develop a feeling of compassion by engaging in merciful acts, as the Sharet Shuvah writes. We are admonished to remove from our souls the attribute of cruelty and plant in it compassion and true kindness. So, it's saying if one does a certain action, you can form a habit and change one's way of operating.
Okay. So Kevin's saying three things there. Point number one is that you would think about the absolute lack of apparent mercy to destroy everything, even the innocent animals of the city, and to burn it to the ground would be a marked representation of the characteristic of cruelty. But because we're doing it on Hashem's commandment, he said he'll make a special edict not to make our character follow habit, in this case, where our character becomes more cruel and unempathetic to others. So it's a special divine discourse that he's giving us, because that's not the natural order. If you act cruelly, you become crueler, you become more desensitized and far more insensitive to the needs of others. So that's one principle that Kevin taught us, that it needs a divine edict to teach us that our heart follows our actions and our habits. The second thing that Kevin taught us, which is very important, is that you have to have the motive of burning every single financial object, because many people in the world are cruel enough to burn down a person in order to gain their assets. Many times people have taken life assurance policies. I see it on DSTV all the time. Even with spouses, they take life assurance policies, and eventually that person dies in a hijacking, or they get poisoned, or brakes fail, or the meticulous efforts made to cover the DNA, but invariably that getting rid of that person is in order to inherit the assets. So when you burn the assets, you prevent motive, because there's no gain. So Kevin, well done on that. I don't know if I'm making some relevant points, Kev. You can tell me if I'm not.
No, well done, both of you. It was well explained by both of you, and thanks for the extension on that. Thanks, Damon.
Pleasure.
That was very useful.
Thank you, mate.
Very useful.
Okay. So, we're going to start with the Gemara share. The first thing I want to do is share my screen. Okay, and just tell you refreshingly where we're holding. So, what we're saying here is as follows. According to our Mishnah in 98b5, it says, if one gave an article to a craftsman to fix. Now, focus on the word fix. And they ruined it. They are liable to pay. If one gave a carpenter a carriage, a box, or a closet to fix, what's the word fix? And he ruined it, he is liable to pay. So that's so far what we're dealing with in context. Now, there's a question that comes up on Rav Ashi, who says that this ruling of the Mishnah was taught only with respect to one who gave the carpenter a finished carriage, a box or a closet to drive a nail into them, make some minor change. And when he made the minor change, like driving the nail into the part to ensure that everything was put together, the carpenter broke the item. Okay? And in that case, there's liability to pay, because the expression litakain basically suggests to fix or repair. So in other words, that gives an implication in the Aramaic that it was something that needed to be repaired, not something to fashion. When it uses the term something to fashion, it means making something out of scratch. But Rav Ashi goes on to say, but if he gave the carpenter wood to make a carriage, a box or a closet, and he made them the carriage, the box or the closet, and broke them afterwards, he's not liable to pay. In other words, the craftsman doesn't have to pay for damaging the finished utensil, which he, the craftsman, made entirely in the first place from wood. But all he has to do is return the wood that was given to him. Okay? And what's the reason? Because a craftsman acquires the improvement to the utensil that comes about through his work. What do we mean by saying a craftsman acquires the improvement of the utensil? What we are saying is, according to Rav Asi, that he maintains that when one contracts a craftsman to complete a specific job for a specific amount of money, we actually don't view the craftsman as earning a wage. What do we view him as? As basically a business owner who's involved with drawing a finished product, and all he needs in that particular case is the wood. I want to throw this phone out the window. It's been buzzing all day, but these are little tests, and hopefully I don't know.
Frozen, it's Damon.
Damon, you
froze.
You froze
Can
for
you
20
just
seconds there.
go back a minute?
Now it's okay.
Okay, I get these stupid spam MTN messages, and what that means is that it stops the connection. Sorry about that, guys. So
Damon,
what
I
I'm
wanted
saying,
to say something just before you. Okay, I'll
ask
something when
what
you finish.
you wanted to ask.
So you're saying that the craftsman does a repair, so it's almost like he's created a new product. He's like, you say, he's like a businessman. So it's almost like a new product.
I'm saying we have to see two different distinct cases. The fact of it is, if you give him something to fix or repair and it's 90 or 80% there, but something's malfunctioned, if he breaks it, he's liable to replace it. Now, he doesn't obviously have to necessarily replace it with something new because it has aged somewhat. So the question is, he has to replace it with the current value, obviously minus the wear and tear. But certainly, you're not interested in getting back pieces of wood, screws and nails and a little motor for your blender to make for your hand blender. You actually want something to function. That is different to a case when you give somebody wood, and what you want them to do is in those days you'd have a craftsman that made cabinets for you. And if he made all the cabinets and you suddenly put books on it and it broke, he has to, at the end of the day, replace your wood. But because he was involved in the entire manufacturing process, he's not seen as a laborer. He's seen as a business owner. Okay? So in fact, he's selling his goods and services because although he bought the wood, he still had to have glues and nails, etc. And it's considered like almost proceeds of the sale rather than a salary or wage. And therefore, since that happens, according to Kedushin 48b, and we're going to discuss why it's in Kedushin later in the daf, because can you acquire a wife on certain things that you've improved? In other words, does it now become yours, or is it just labor that you forgot? So, in other words, the contractor fashioned the wood into a utensil from scratch and broke it before returning it. So in that case, the reason why he's liable only to pay for the wood and not for the value of the finished utensil is because he was now the owner of the improvement. What he is doing is selling you a finished product. So it's like going into Joshua Door and buying a cabinet. And in those days, okay, the woods were supplied, etc., but the person is a business owner. So they have to replace that which they took from you, whether it was a financial deposit. Say you gave money as a deposit, he'd have to refund your deposit. But he doesn't have to replace the cabinet or anything other than you gave him in terms of vested interest, because he's seen as a business owner. He's not seen as a laborer. Whereas when he does fixing or repairing, there's no ways that he has acquisition of the object because he never took it from scratch and developed it. He made minor tweaks to it. And therefore is fully responsible for taking something that was in reasonably, I wouldn't say reasonably working order, but certainly had the potential for working order and completely dismantled it. So therefore there's higher culpability if he's doing a repair job as opposed to if he's manufacturing it from scratch. That's what Rav Asi is saying, Kevin. Now, the problem is that completely contradicts our Mishnah. Why? Let me share the Mishnah again and show you. Okay, that's why it's bringing up this point. Because what does the Mishnah say? Very simple. If one gave an article to craftsmen to fix and they ruined it, they are liable to pay. Okay? Now, in our English translation, it uses the word to fix and they ruined it. But originally, it doesn't say that. It just says, if you look at the Aramaic, if they gave an article to craftsmen and they ruined it, they are liable to pay. Now, is this part of the Mishnah not dealing with where he gave the craftsman wood, which they made into a carriage, a box, or cabinet, and it was then ruined, and then the Mishnah rules that they are liable to pay for the finished product? And the Gemara says no, because the Mishnah might refer to where he gave the craftsman a carriage, a box, or utensil to repair, and they ruined it. When, however, he gave the craftsman wood, which they fashioned into a utensil, and then it was ruined, they're not liable to pay for the finished product. So one of the things that threw me off the Gemara is in the translation of the Mishnah here, it kind of gives away the game. It says if one gave an article to craftsmen to fix and they ruined it, they are liable to pay. If they gave a carpenter a carriage, a box, or a closet to fix and he ruined it, he's liable to pay. So the problem with the way the Schottenstein seems to be translated is it's giving away the question in the translation automatically up front, because the whole question was derived from obscurity. It wasn't revealed whether or not it was a repair from its inception, if it was a creation fashioned from inception, or if it was for a repair. And that's why the question came up. It's saying that it doesn't seem to agree with Rav Ashi, because it seems rather generic about the fact that you have to pay no matter what. In other words, whether you're fixing an article or whether you're creating it from scratch. Gemara answers, Gav, are you okay? Gavin?
He's tired, he's exhausted, I think.
I know. Gav?
He's hearing you subconsciously, Damon. Should I phone him? Let me find him. Let me just leave him phone. If his phone rings, then it'll, let me just dial his number.
His screen is frozen. Maybe lost Rashid. You can call me Rav Benzodiazepine.
His phone. Let's just see if he reacts. Hello, that's ringing. Here we go. Okay.
Waking me up. I'm destroyed on it today.
No, but as you. Okay, so these.
I drove to Centurion and asked Damon. I had such an intense day. It was intense for me too.
Good. Okay, but
it's very hard.
The main thing is you didn't doze off while you were driving back. You dozed off.
No, thank God you're driving. You're only dozing off at the shear. You know what?
Exactly.
You can call me Rav Zano or Benzodiazepine.
Yeah. Listen, I fell asleep. Is this called driving on the gravy train? What's the gravy train? What does that expression mean?
It means that you at Zuma and the ANC and
the whole of them. Yeah.
That they take. No. A gravy train means there's opportunities where there's slush funds where you're going along for the ride and you're not providing any benefit or value. You're going along
taking advantage.
Advantage, right? You're not doing that. You're exhausted. You've had a hectic day, and I'm boring as hell. I know that. So all we are saying.
No. It's not you at all. I'm tired. I came here. Let me just drink some. Have something to drink. Some water.
Put some water under your eyes. Jeez.
Gavin, I know how you feel, bro.
I appreciate it. And it's horrible when you get that call when you're busy dozing, eh? Somebody like in the group's waking up.
My only problem is Danny calls me half the time, and then he cuts me off, and I got to log out, get back in, and try to get back to the call. Sometimes it clicks back on my head, but then it doesn't.
No problem.
Is everybody frozen now? Oh, you're back.
Okay, so I'll tell you where we left off, Gavin. It's like one of the issues that I had in the Gemara is in the Schottenstein, it seemed to put the answer in the whole question. Because Rav Ashi was basically saying, look, if you're fixing or repairing something, you can't consider yourself a business owner as such. You basically got paid for your labor to fix it up and do a minor tweak. If you make something from scratch, you then have a carpentry shop and you're almost reselling the goods. And therefore, if you're taking ownership, you only have to replace the financial deposit or the wood that you've been given. So it allows you a certain luxury that it doesn't when you're just taking something that's reasonable. They can take a minor repair and you've ruined it completely. Then you have to replace the article. So somebody took a fridge, for example. They bought the fridge from Game and it needed regassing and you ruined the fridge. You're going to want the fridge replaced, guys. You might turn around and say, I want a new fridge. And the guy says, listen, it's not worth a new fridge. But whatever it's worth, you're going to replace it lock, stock and barrel because he never manufactured the fridge from scratch. All he did was do a slight repair and he ruined everything. So that's Rav Ashi's take, Kevin. Now, the Gemara doesn't seem to agree because it says in our Mishnah, if you give an article to a craftsman and they ruined it, they're liable to pay. So it's asking if that's the case, is this part of the Mishnah not dealing with where he gave the craftsman wood, where they made into a carriage, a box, or a closet or cabinet, and then it was ruined? And still the Mishnah rules that they're liable to pay for the finished product. In other words, this seems to be an argument, our Mishnah against Rav Ashi, who says that evidently our Mishnah maintains that a contractor does not acquire the improvement to the utensil when it was made and fabricated virtually from scratch. And therefore the contractor is liable to pay for the finished product, which belongs to the owner of the wood. So that seems to be our Mishnah contradiction to Rav Ashi. Okay? So the Gemara says no, it's not a contradiction to Rav Ashi. Why? Because our Mishnah might refer to where he gave the craftsman a carriage, a box, or a utensil to repair, and the craftsman ruined it. And when we say craftsman, we don't mean one, as in M-A-N, we mean M-E-N, meaning it was a firm of craftsmen. It's like you take it to a repair shop and they ruined it. But it's stating that when you gave the craftsman wood, which they fashioned into a utensil from scratch and they ruined, they're not liable for the finished product. So it's saying it's not a proof against Rav Ashi. All it needs is clarification. The Gemara is not in contradiction. And the Gemara says, no, look, we've still got a problem, because in the Mishnah's latter clause, it teaches that if one gives a carpenter a carriage, a box, or closet to repair, it therefore implies that the first clause deals with where he gave the craftsman wood, and they ruined it after making a finished product. In other words, it's saying either way, it's seeming to imply that there's a payment due. And that goes against Rav Ashi. It seems to say quite clearly. So the Gemara says, well, is it possible to reconcile it? And they said, no, well, it might be reconcilable, because it could be a case that the Mishnah's latter clause about fixing and repairing is explaining the first clause. Why? Because the latter clause is not presenting a new case. Because all it's doing is expounding on the first clause, and it means to say as follows. What's the circumstances of the Mishnah's ruling that if one gave an article to craftsmen to fix and they ruined it, they're liable to pay? In the case where he gave the carpenter a carriage, a box, or closet to fix, and he ruined it. But if he gave a carpenter wood with which to make a carriage, box, or closet, and the carpenter ruined it after making the finished product, he's not liable to pay for the finished product. And it would seem to agree with Rav Ashi, because it seems to corroborate that assertion. And the Gemara even adds any further details. It said, so, in fact, it's more reasonable to explain the Mishnah's latter clause about fixing as follows. It's simply an explanation of the first clause in the sense of what? What's the circumstance? So if it should enter your mind that the first part of the Mishnah refers to where he gave the craftsman wood, which the craftsman ruined after making it into a finished product, you're going to be confronted, guys, with the following difficulty. Now that the Mishnah has already taught us in the first clause that even when you give the craftsman a finished product, they're not liable to pay. We don't say that a craftsman acquired improvement to the utensils. It's necessary for the Mishnah to teach the second clause that they're also liable when there's repair done and ruined. So what it's saying is you're going to have a difficulty, and that difficulty is as follows. It seems to imply either way that even when the craftsman acquires improvement to the utensils, the Mishnah clearly states there's liability to pay, which means an improvement doesn't affect ownership for the craftsman where he only has to pay for the wood. And the case for repair is obvious. What's not obvious is that first case that there's liability to pay if you're creating a product from scratch, and therefore you almost providing not labor services but a manufacturing goods services where you own the product until the other party pays. So that's the Gemara is saying there is a problem, but the Gemara is saying there is a solution. Because if your proof is on the basis of that argument, it's not really a proof, guys. Why? Because you can say that the Tana stated the latter case in order to clarify the first case. That you should not say that the first case, which holds that the craftsman liable, refers only to where he gave the craftsman a carriage, box, or closet, but where he gave them wood, they are not liable. Okay? In other words, it's saying that even in the case, it's not just a case of if you gave them raw material of the wood, that all you have to replace is the wood if the craftsman went through all of this and finally damaged their own product. Saying in that case, there's liability too, meaning that they don't effect acquisition at any stage for the craftsman, and that there's liability to pay. So you could come to that conclusion. So to prevent that misinterpretation, the Tana had to state the latter case first, right? Well, sorry, the latter case second, of the carriage, the box, or the closet, which implies that the first case refers to where he gave him, okay, to make it into a carriage, a box or closet. And even then the craftsman is liable to pay. So he's saying, look, it's obvious that if you've got a fridge and you just repay to regas it and you ruin the whole fridge, you have to replace it. But it got that out of the way in order to prove something a little bit more unique. That according to our Mishnah, which is not a support for Rav Ashi at all, is that any sort of tampering that you did with it, you're liable to pay for the finished product. And that you are, in a way, even though you might have your own business, you are considered responsible to replace it. And it's not as if you weren't supplied with any material. In other words, the very fact that you were supplied with wood means that in a way you're a laborer. It can be slightly different that if you supply every raw material, the guy puts on a bookshelf, all you have to do is refund him his money or give him another article. But if he's starting to supply goods, then are you in fact a business owner, or are you in fact, what do you call it, paid for your labor, at which case you've ruined what he gave you. At which case the other argument comes is, what have you ruined of his? Maybe it's just wood. And therefore that's enough that you only replace the wood, and others say you replace the finished product. Okay? So the Gemara actually attempts to find support for Rav Asi's ruling, because it's not from our Mishnah, but it's from a separate Mishnah in 100a. So let's say the following Mishnah in 100a supports him, because what will we learn? We'll learn if one gives wool to a dyer and the vat burnt it. What do we mean in the vat burnt it? So the dyer basically placed wool with dye in a dyer's vat and left it on the fire too long. And it ruined the color and the wool that he was dyeing with it. That's according to Rashi. Meaning it's not just that you cold dye. You actually almost boil this dye where it permeates every fiber of the wool and it becomes permanent dye. It's not like today's technology where you can use a cold dyeing process. It had to be heated and almost cooked with the dye. So in that case, if it was too hot and the vat burnt the wool, the dyer only pays the value of the wool. But the Mishnah, you've got to know, states that yes, for the value of the wool he pays. Okay? But for the value of the wool and its improvement, he does not pay. So, in other words, if the guy gave him wool to dye and he dyed it was unsuccessful, he has to replace the wool. But he doesn't have to replace the wool with the correct color and with the correct dye. So the Gemara is suggesting, is it not referring to where the vat burnt it after the dye took hold, meaning it was successfully dyed, and therefore that's the definition of an improvement of wool before it became damaged. And you can learn from this maybe that a craftsman acquires an improvement to the utensil affected by his work, meaning that the reason why the dyer pays only the original raw material he was given and not for the improvement is because the improvement was done and then the wool was burnt. And then that kind of gives a bit of indemnity to the dyer, to where it becomes his product, since it wasn't just labor but dye involved, and he only has to replace the raw material. So what they're doing is they're taking this Mishnah from the 100th daf, and they're trying to support Rav Asi with our Mishnah in the 98th daf. But the Gemara rejects the proof. It says, listen, you can't come to that sort of conclusion. Why? Because if you look at what the Tana Shmuel said, it says, what are we dealing with here in our Mishnah according to Shmuel? It's a case in which the vat burnt the wool while the dye was taking hold. And what does that mean? It means that the dyer made a fire under the vat and it became too high, and the wool actually became ruined before the improvement that the dye took effect. So all he did was ruin the other guy's wool, but he never changed it into a product he can own as a business owner, as a haberdashery or dyeing shop, and therefore that doesn't offer him any protection. So you can't learn from there. It's because that the dyeing process successfully took place before it was burnt that gets the dyer off the hook. Because Shmuel said, listen, it was burnt up before the dyeing actually took hold. Okay? Now, the Gemara then draws an inference from Shmuel's answer, and it said, but hang on a second, if the vat burnt it after the dye took hold, what would the law be according to Shmuel? Because according to Shmuel's answer, it emerges that he pays him the value of the wool and its improvements. Okay? So let us say then that Shmuel does not hold the ruling of Rav Asi, that a craftsman acquires the improvements he made to the utensil and is therefore not liable for subsequent damage to that improvement. In other words, Rav Asi says that the only thing that has to be replaced is the wool. According to Shmuel, both the wool and improvement has to be replaced, it would seem, and therefore it seems he doesn't agree with Rav Asi. And the Gemara rejects that suggestion. It says, look, Shmuel would say to you, we're dealing with a special case here, where the wool and the dye belongs to the homeowner. In other words, the one who hired the dyer actually bought all the raw materials, not only the wool, but the dye. And therefore, what is he paying the dyer for, guys? He's paying him for his handiwork only, his labor. Meaning that Shmuel agrees with Rav Asi that where there's a craftsman, takes an improvement, okay, he acquires that improvement and is not liable, subsequently damages it. But where the owner gave all the raw materials, what is he paying for? He's paying for time and labor. But what did the dyer actually do? He merely boiled it with his expertise. He didn't supply any of the materials. And therefore, it would seem that if you explain it like this, that Shmuel is not arguing with Rav Asi, but in fact agreeing with him under this circumstance. Do you get what I'm saying? So it's saying you can't necessarily interpret Shmuel as disagreeing with him. So it wants to say that Shmuel's saying here is that it's a case where the one who hired the dyer supplied the dye and the wages of his handiwork. And the whole reason that the person is responsible for the improvement is because the original owner bought the dye. If the dyer bought the dye, it's his loss. It's not the original owner's loss. Yes, he replaces the wool, but that's it. And the Gemara also rejects this interpretation. Why? It says because if so that the Mishnah speaks of a case in which the dye too belonged to the homeowner, the Mishnah should actually state that the dyer pays him the value of the wool and the dye, meaning that he ruined the owner's wool and the owner's dye. So since the Mishnah doesn't hold him liable for the dye, it refers obviously to where the owner of the dye shop, the haberdashery shop, supplied the dye. And then in that particular case, it would seem that he doesn't necessarily agree with Rav Asi. So why is this not a proof against Rav Asi? Well, the Gemara concedes and says, look, the interpretation above is incorrect, and it says that Shmuel only makes a person pay for the improvements when the dye supplies both the raw material of the wool and the dye. But other than that, the only thing he has to replace is the wool. So that doesn't quite work with Rav Asi, because Shmuel is saying that even in the case before the dyeing took place, meaning it doesn't provide, if the dye never took hold, he should replace more than just the wool. Okay, but because the dye took hold, it then offers protection for the dyer. And Shmuel is saying, no, in the case, it is wool. So you replace the wool. So it doesn't seem to agree with Rav Asi. So the Mishnah is saying, well, why doesn't it disagree with Rav Asi? And the reason is Shmuel was merely deflecting the proof and wasn't going against Rav Asi, meaning that Shmuel didn't mean to say that the Mishnah's ruling must be interpreted as pertaining only to where the dyer burnt the wool before the dye took hold, because that would obviously demonstrate he disagrees with Rav Asi. Shmuel rather just said that it could be interpreted like that, where the damage took place before the dye took hold, after it took hold. And since there's no direct conflict with Rav Asi, it's not a proof for and it's not a proof against. All right, guys, I hope I've explained it decently.
For the